From the studios of the Department of Communication in Phillipsburg, welcome to Prime Minister Talks with Honorable Prime Minister Silveria Jacobs.
Good afternoon and welcome to PM Talks, episode 20. I am Silveria Jacobs, and today for episode 20 for August 7, 2020, we have with us the SG, the Secretary General of General Affairs, Mr. Hensley Plantain, who is joining me today as the chairperson of the legal group of experts that the Council of Ministers has put together as a result of the proposal put forth by the Netherlands regarding the consensus law and the entity to disseminate funds regarding two reforms. Good afternoon, Mr. Plantain. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Prime Minister. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes, so the Council of Ministers put together a group of experts, and maybe you can share with the general public who these persons are and what your tasks are.
The Council of Ministers, after receiving the proposal of the Kingdom Council of Ministers, decided that this is an issue that needs further legal research. So the Council decided to establish a work group consisting of Mr. Dennis Richardson, Mr. Roland Duncan, Mr. Ralph Richardson, and Ms. Elena Barry, and I got the honor to chair the work group. We had several meetings already. The assignment was to see if the proposal, if the draft Kingdom law as proposed by the Kingdom Council of Ministers is in accordance with our Constitution and the Charter of the Kingdom of the Netherlands.
And what can you say were some of the findings that the different members within the work group came forward with and advised the Council of Ministers?
Yes. The first thing we realized is that in the draft Kingdom law, they are proposing an entity that will get more power than, for example, our parliament. So the entity will get the authority to decide on projects and financing on projects without having the approval of the Council of Ministers or the discussion in Parliament. So that is against our Constitution. As it is known to everybody, the Council of Ministers needs to answer to Parliament. So it cannot be so that the Council of Ministers now will approve with a draft Kingdom law that will take the authority away from their bosses, to call it like that. So that is one of the first, I think, major concerns that we had with the draft Kingdom law.
What is, in your opinion, Mr. Plantain, as a Secretary General with many years' experience, author of books on our Constitution even, what do you think is the purpose of the entity from the perspective of the Netherlands?
Now, the purpose is, I want to be very blunt, the purpose is to take over all authority of the country. So the purpose is to give the entity all the authority to whatever Holland decides needs to be implemented in St. Maarten. It will be implemented the way they want it to be implemented. So the involvement of the representative of the people, it's almost not existent. It is Holland who will decide these are the projects that are good for St. Maarten, and the entity will be the one responsible for the execution. So that, according to me, when you read the law, there is no involvement of people from St. Maarten in the entity. There is no involvement of the government of St. Maarten to appoint someone in the entity. So therefore, that decision by the entity, they need to answer to the Minister of Kingdom Affairs. So we are not involved in decision making. So the purpose of the entity is to execute projects the way Holland wanted, financed by Holland.
And do you think that seeing that that is their goal and seeing that it is proposed in this manner, up to our recent discussions this morning with the State Secretary and his Director General, Do you feel that this is a cooperative process, or is it, well, you mentioned already, is the entity would have the sole decision making
Yes.
pertaining to the funding?
Yeah.
But the state secretary continues to put out in the general public that, of course, we have to have a decision from the COM, et cetera, before they can execute certain things. Is that how it is being seen by the legal experts?
No. When we see, there are a few steps to be taken. So if the consensus kingdom law is approved, the entity is established
By law.
by law. So that means there is where our involvement will stop. There is no involvement of the government of St. Martin in the appointment of personnel in the entity. There is no involvement of the government in St. Martin in the projects that will be also approved by the same kingdom law, what they call the landspakketten. So the involvement of the government of St. Martin is at the beginning, at the beginning of the process to approve the draft kingdom law. After we approve it, we are out of the game, to say it like that. A question may be, what is the advantage of such an entity? The entity on itself should not be a problem. We can have an entity that coordinates projects, that monitor the way projects are executed, that monitor the financing. That's always good.
Right.
But the way it is presented now, there is no involvement. We have no influence on the project, on the financing. So the way it is presented, I don't think it is good for the country.
I think that it's important that we have this conversation in a frank manner for the general public of St. Martin to be able to understand that it is not that the countries of Aruba, Curacao, and St. Martin are saying no for no sake.
Yes.
And we are nearing the end of the first segment, and we'll be taking a very short break, after which we return in the segment number 2 to go further into that discussion and the responsibilities within the
Very
entity,
good.
as well as our counter-proposal.
Okay, very good.
We'll be right back. This is PM Talks, episode 20, here with Mr. Hensley Fontaine, talking about the Kingdom Consensus Law and the entity for liquidity support as well as reforms on St. Martin. Stay tuned.
Prime Minister Talks with Honorable Prime Minister Sylvaria Jacobs.
St. Martin has experienced its fair share of hurricanes over the past 25 years, and we faced them all head on. We've witnessed horrific seasons with staggering loss of property, but this year might be the most destructive of all. The destructive power of hurricanes coupled with the debilitating coronavirus pandemic. Where do you run? Where can you hide? Now is the time to prepare. Think about how and where you'll evacuate to reduce crowds at shelters and maintain social distancing. Have a plan for keeping your elderly family members safe. We live in a hurricane-prone area, so start gathering essential hurricane supplies now. Things like plywood, batteries, generators. Strengthen your home as much as possible while you have time on your hands. While preparing for the hurricane season, follow the latest health guidelines at stmartingov.org/coronavirus. And remember, it only takes one to make it a bad season, so make sure you're prepared.
This public service announcement is brought to you by the Government of St. Martin.
Safety tips on how to use your mask. Wear your mask in public places. When removing your mask, properly take your mask off by grabbing the bottom ties of your mask, then the ties at the top, and remove the mask. When disposing the mask, discard the mask in the trash can and do not litter. Safety first. Don't touch your eyes, nose, or mouth until washing your hands thoroughly for 20 seconds. These safety tips are brought to you by Collective Prevention Services and the Department of Communication.
Prime Minister Talks with Honorable Prime Minister Sylvaria Jacobs.
Welcome back to segment 2 of episode 20 of PM Talks. I'm Sylvaria Jacobs, here together with Mr. Hensley Fontaine, my SG. of the Ministry of General Affairs. Mr. Plantain, we were just talking about the entity, we were talking about the Kingdom Consensus Law, and I think we probably skipped ahead a little too fast for persons who may be not even sure what we're talking about.
Yeah.
A proposal was made on the 10th of July to the countries of Aruba, Curacao, and St. Martin in a take it or leave it fashion to be able to get COVID-19 support, financial support in the third tranche, as well as a whole basket of goods, promised as well as projects, etc., in order to be able to put necessary reforms in place so that we have resiliency, that we're able to better handle our shocks.
Yeah.
Explain what is considered by the legal experts incorrect about the way this consensus kingdom law was proposed to be able to do all that.
Yes. That is a very good question, PM. You are right. We start sometimes we start a discussion
From our own understanding.
Exactly. But you need to really, really break it down. And I will have a remark at the end of the program about that. This is the normal procedure that the Kingdom Council of Ministers should work. When the kingdom has a draft law of a kingdom law, they will present it to the members of the Council of Ministers of the Kingdom. Those members, in this case, we have the Minister Plenipotentiary, will take it home, and then there is a procedure to follow. For example, you need to gather advice of your own council of advice of all the countries. You need to go to the Parliament to have a discussion, and then with that result of those negotiations, you take it back to the Kingdom Council of Ministers. Also, your organization, Department of Legal Affairs, or other departments that are involved, if it is something financial, economic, so the organization has to be involved also. This particular draft is more specific in the sense that it is called a consensus draft kingdom law. We know that during the negotiations to reach 10-10-10, we had a few consensus kingdom laws. Those negotiations took a very long time for us to reach consensus. So in this case, what is happening is, knowing that there is a procedure to be followed, while the Kingdom Council of Ministers present a draft consensus kingdom law and give the islands 4 days to either accept or not accept. So the first thing, as a legal expert, you will say, no, you did not follow the procedure. So that is the first reason that, and according to me, that is also what Parliament decided in the motion, that, okay, you did not follow the procedure. A kingdom law, a consensus kingdom law, and we only get 4 days to accept, that is not in accordance with the procedure. So for that reason alone, you can reject that. And then the content. Now, as mentioned, the content will bypass Parliament. It is a little too much to ask for a Council of Ministers to accept a law that take away the authority of Parliament without consulting Parliament, without consulting your representation. So that is the second point, not to accept it, to avoid political crisis, to avoid a crisis in St. Martin. If I may, the beginning was that St. Martin requested financing for the SSRP, and then the reaction of the Kingdom Council was, you will get this first tranche, you need to do some cost-cutting measure, but we need to discuss structural reform. No problem. They mentioned there's going to be an entity to monitor all that.
No problem.
There was no problem. But when we received it, and the 4 days that we got to respond, I don't think nobody will accept that. No.
Yeah. Well, we are still at that point. I must say, all three countries, some had more negotiation talks than others.
Yeah.
And I must say that this week, St. Martin did respond in a letter that for the same thing, kind of repeating what was said in the 10th meeting, that the process wasn't followed properly.
Yeah.
Notwithstanding that, we appreciate the offer of the assistance, and we would like to see that it be done in a proper discussion, behoorlijk overleg, as you would say, and that we're given an opportunity to have input and say, and we made a proposal.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we received a letter back from Mr. Knopf stating that, well, it's either you accept it in the cadres in which it was presented, in the structure in which it was presented, or you don't.
Yeah.
So for me, that still speaks of a lack of consensus, a lack of overleg and discussion, and being told that you didn't negotiate in the first 2 weeks as well after that. What do you think about the counter proposal of St. Martin, and can you give a bit of background information on that?
Yes, it is very important that you refer to the letter, PM, because the title, if you can, of your letter is to have an open and honest dialogue. Again, if we are discussing a consensus draft law, we need to have a consensus. For us to reach a consensus, we need to have an open and honest discussion. So the way the letter was presented was good at the beginning already. And then the content. As I mentioned just now, we don't have a problem with the entity. So in the letter you proposed, on behalf of government, let us have a negotiation, a discussion on the entity. And we will, the Charter of the Kingdom gives the possibility to have agreements between countries on what they call onderlinge regeling. So instead of going on the level of a Rijkswet, let us agree on, we will establish it by law, but by a lower law onderlinge regeling, and then you have your parliament involved, kingdom, your council of ministers, etc., etc. So basically, in your letter, you propose the same entity that they propose, but on a level that all the countries will have more involvement. So, but hey, they rejected that. But I think that was a very good proposal.
Thank you, Mr. Plantain. We're nearing the end of the second segment. It goes very quickly. Yeah. When we come back, we didn't touch on it in terms of the duration of the entity that was being proposed, or the law that was being proposed, and its entity, what our counter proposal said. So when we come back, we will try to wrap up that part of the discussions, and then you can further inform the public as to where they can get more information on this topic, because of course 30 minutes or 3 times 8 minutes is not enough for us to be able to go in an in-depth discussion, but hopefully this would have awakened your appetite to know more about what has been proposed, where we are as St. Martin, and how we can move forward from here. Stay tuned as we return with episode 20, segment 3.
Prime Minister Talks with Honorable Prime Minister Sylvaria Jacobs.
This hurricane season 2020 will be a difficult one. With the ongoing pandemic, it is essential to be even more prepared this season. Have your disaster kit ready with all the essentials. Make sure that you have enough canned foods and bottled water. Be sure to make copies of all your important documents and safely store them away. Have your first aid kit ready in case of any eventualities. Make sure to pre-plan and do what you have to do to secure your family. And finally, make sure you keep up to date and get your information from the official governmental communication sources and services of the Meteorological Department of St. Martin and the Department of Communication DCOM at Facebook.com/SXMGov, the website stmartingov.org/hurricane, the radio station 107.9 FM, and the YouTube channel Government of St. Martin. This message is brought to you by the Government of St. Martin and the Department of Communication.
coronavirus is most likely to spread from person to person when we come into close contact with one another. We can all help stop the spread by keeping our distance. This means do not shake hands or exchange physical greetings, and wherever possible, stay at least 1.5 to 2 meters away from others. It's also really important to practice good hygiene, especially after being in public places. Together we can help stop the spread and stay healthy. Visit stmartingov.org/coronavirus or call 914 to learn more. This public service announcement is brought to you by the government of St. Martin.
Prime Minister Talks with Honorable Prime Minister Sylvaria Jacobs.
Welcome back to PM Talks. This is our last segment for episode 20, where we're discussing together with SG Plantain about the proposed Kingdom Law and the entity to disseminate the funds under the direction of the Ministry of BZK, which has been proposed by the Dutch government and not approved in the Kingdom Council of Ministers because the countries of Aruba, Curacao, and St. Martin did not agree. There was no consensus. So here we are, this time period of a month in between, whereby a majority of persons within the Ministry of BZK were actually on vacation, but some discussions did take place on the technical level between the Department of BUC and the Ministry of BZK, especially as relates to the pakketten, the landspakketten. You mentioned that.
Yeah.
Also, many persons are concerned about the duration of the time that the entity was proposed for. If you can go a bit into the duration, who would have been financially responsible, etc., who would be working in this entity, and then where we are with our landspakketten.
Yeah. So to understand the implication when accepting this
Proposal.
proposal, already mentioned the consequences for bypassing Parliament, Council of Ministers, etc., etc. The duration is 7 years. So there are projects to be implemented during that period. So during at least 7 years, the involvement of Parliament and Council of Ministers of St. Martin is almost non-existent. The very important thing of a consensus law in our kingdom is also for you to terminate the law, there needs to be consensus. So if after 7 years, St. Martin will say, okay, that's enough. Holland will say, no, we still need another 7 years. It will continue for another 7 years. We need to admit, PM, that in the proposal it is also mentioned that Holland will finance all the projects. So if those are the facts. So I'm not going to not hide that fact. The fact is that the financing will be done also by Holland. There is no cost for St. Martin other than the consequences. There was another part of the question.
Landspakketten.
Yes. One of the elements in the offer is also that Holland presented a document with a lot of projects that they consider that the countries need to implement, and that they consider the structural reform. In the case of the other islands, I know they had some projects going already, so they protested also and told Holland, hey, we're busy with this. In the case of St. Martin, as everybody would know, we started with a national development plan. By now, we spoke with the stakeholders, we spoke with the NGOs, but we decided to make it now a national development vision. Now that NDV, as we call it, we align it with the proposal of Holland, and the result is that let's say a percentage of 40% is what we already have in our national development vision. We compare it also with the draft governing program. That's also like 30%. So there are some 60% of what Holland is proposing we already have as projects for us to execute. And the other...
In various stages.
In various stages. And the other 40% will say, okay, but that is not necessarily our priority now, or that is something that we can do together with other priorities. So based on that alignment comparison we presented to the Council of Ministers, the result and the next step is for us to come with one document including the part of the landspakketten proposed by Holland, presented to government with or without reaching no consensus with Holland. This is what we consider to be a good start for our structural reform in St. Martin. And that will be presented maybe in a week or two. Yes. So we make use also of their information, because not everything what is coming from their side is bad. And to make one document, yes, to make one document and present it to government. So that's the landspakket, what we have now.
A lot of complicated information, I think, for the persons who may not be on a daily basis involved in these types of discussions. Yeah. And I could say back before 10-10-10, I really didn't pay attention to those discussions either. Yeah. So not knocking anyone for saying, hey, boring, not interesting. Yeah. But it plays a big role in how we will move forward here in St. Martin. And I would like to know from you, as chairman of the legal experts team that has been put together, how do you feel about, because you brought it forward and we talked about this, yes, informing the public. How yes. do you plan to do this?
Yes, I start with the end. I'm happy that you approve that we can have an information session. So what we did now, as you mentioned, we established the work group. And in the work group, the members got separate assignment, what they have to do the research for. We, in conversation with you, we agreed that we are going to share that information with the public. Because again, that is my daily work. You know about it, but maybe the public doesn't understand the fundamentals of what we're discussing now. So next week, Wednesday, we will have our first program with Mr. Dennis Richardson. He is going to explain, and I'm going to host the program, what is a consensus kingdom law? What is the procedure? We will go in more detail what the consensus kingdom law is and what the consequence will be if the government of St. Martin accepts the way it is presented now. So that is going to be the first program. The next program with Mr. Roland Duncan is going to be on the autonomy of the authority of the Council of Ministers of St. Martin to accept that proposal. And then we will follow with 2 or 3 more programs depending on the way the discussion is going. But I am very grateful that you agree that we can have that information session, and I ask the public to watch Wednesday at DCOM. I think it is 6 o'clock in the afternoon. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Plantain. Thank you to all who are tuned in here today and who will look at this at a later time, whether today or later on in the week. This is the first part of the, let's say, the introduction to the information sessions. You can also tune into Parliament, where we'll be discussing the SSRP as well as the entity this afternoon, hopefully, if we get to that agenda point. This is the forum through which you get your information, and it is important that we utilize every opportunity to educate our people as to what is being proposed and that we do not make, let's call it, emotional decisions. I would like to reiterate that Prime Minister Talks has been a program put together to bring information on the workings of government, and it is my pleasure to be able to host this here today with the Secretary General of AZET, General Affairs, and I expect you to tune in when we'll be bringing you many more informative programs so that you, the people, will be continuously updated as to what your government is up to and also why. I'm Silveria Jacobs. Thank you for joining us. Episode 20, PM Talks. See you next time. Be blessed, St. Martin.